Hey, Julie.
Hi.
How are you? So Julie Thibault and Bart Higgins.
Hi there.
Hello, Bart. How are you? Let me
You guys have the
give
mustache
you.
thing in common.
Yeah, it's the new thing.
Yeah. Was that not a pre-COVID mustache? Because I assume it's grown in popularity over the last couple months.
Yeah, this is a COVID stash. 100%.
Yeah. I'm actually thinking about keeping it, to be honest.
Yeah, to tell you the truth, I am too.
Yeah, people say I've got sort of like a Clark Gable look.
Yeah, my wife says the exact opposite of that.
That's what I say to my husband, who has one too.
Yours looks much more sophisticated than mine does.
Oh, really? Oh, thank you. I've been trying to figure out how to trim it by watching some YouTube videos. Let me formally introduce you two, and then I know you have a presentation that you'd like to share, which means I may share it, but we can try seeing whether you share it, and then we can get into some Q&A on the future of bricks and mortar retail. So very quickly, let me just pull up my notes here. So Julie Thibault is a former head of beauty innovation at Chanel. She's the founder of Martingale Advisors, and Bart Higgins is the founder of Future Perfect X. Julie spent 13 years at Chanel, where she led the efforts into retail innovation to create experiences with fragrance and beauty products. Now at Martingale Advisors, she's helping brands and retailers evolve retail beyond the average store experience. At Future Perfect X, Bart partners with clients globally to enable and activate brand design and experience innovation. Bart has helped develop new business models, invent groundbreaking services, places, and experiences, and drive business growth for some of the world's leading companies. We're going to talk about today is what's the future of bricks and mortar retail when e-commerce is taking over. So Julie, do you want to try sharing your screen?
You know what? I'm actually thinking it's probably best if you do it for no other reason than the lights are flickering because there's a massive thunderstorm outside. So I think there's a good chance I might get shut off.
Yeah. Technical difficulties of another sort.
Yeah.
So let me share right now. So
in the meantime, while you're, there you go. I think he did an exemplary introduction of us. So I'm Julie Thibault, and basically we're here today to have a public version of a conversation or debate that Bart and I started a few months ago, where he texted me at the beginning of this pandemic and said, "I think retail's dead." And I texted him back and I was like, sadly, I think that you might be right, that this is the straw that broke the camel's back. So I think we both marinated on that for a few weeks, went about our work lives, and then came back recently with our thinking evolving to be a bit more optimistic, to say, you know what, maybe COVID was the kick in the pants, and more formally catalyst, that the retail industry actually really needed to reboot. So if you go to the next, go ahead, Bart.
I was going to say, I think that kind of to add to that, I don't think there's any kind of magic answer or magic pill right now. I think what we now need to recognize is that COVID has pushed us over kind of the cliff, kind of the point of no return. And now what's needed is continued debate and innovative thinking to figure out what's next.
Absolutely. So I think to help you take along in the path of our evolution of thinking, we had this quick slide. It's a trip down memory lane. And we look at it from both. The top is the reasons why a consumer visited a shop, and the bottom is why a brand had a shop. And if you go back to pre-2000, which Bart and I, being Gen Xers, growing up in Hawaii and Florida respectively, we have very, very fond memories of the mall in the 1990s. And the primary reason that you went to the mall was because there was no other place to buy anything discretionary. So that was the key reason. And of course, you browsed, you socialized, just watch Mallrats or Clueless, seeking out expertise, because back to your YouTube mustache example, before YouTube, if I wanted to know how to do my makeup, my sister took me to the Clinique counter to talk to the expert there. And of course, entertainment in the form of movies and food halls. And I'm sure, Bart, in Florida, you had like the boy bands coming to do events in the mall.
For me, it was all about parachute pants and merry-go-round.
And then it was so simple as a brand. You needed a store to sell something, right? That's why you were there. Then you see, and it's funny, when I was taking over fragrances at Chanel, I found an article circled left over from my predecessor on the desk that said in 1998 that e-commerce was going to be big. And in 2000, what happened is, while you still would go to stores to buy something, you started to see the main reason people going to physical places was actually to try something on in person. And I think it's no surprise that by 2019, the top retail performers are things like categories like beauty and electronics, the Sephora, Ultas, and Apple stores of the world, where that in-person trial is still really important. And seeking out expertise kind of fell to the bottom, because now the consumer is smarter than most people who are actually at the store. And then from a brand perspective, yes, you still were opening stores to sell something in it, but you started to hear conversations of big brands, particularly in my old industry and luxury, justifying expensive flagship locations to build legitimacy, or DTC brands opening retail to build awareness. So we're moving to 2020 now, and what we actually think is that buying something or selling something is not going to be a major factor for either brands or customers when they visit a physical space.
I think if you just look at the precipitous decline of the buy something on this slide, you begin to start to realize, wow, there's a business model that was built around places to buy things that today and in the future is an irrelevant business model.
Right.
It's a stifling kind of thought if you are in the retail business as a brand or as an operator of a mall or a retail destination.
And we'll get to why that fundamentally challenges innovation in a little bit. Yeah. So the next slide is our first hypothesis, which I think most people who are probably here on this virtual conference agree with, is that we think that e-commerce will simply just be commerce. Most transactions will occur on a digital platform. This was happening before COVID. It's a better, more efficient way as a consumer. You don't have to deal with parking lots and commission salespeople. For brands, it's less capital intensive and more easily measurable and where your dollar is going. And then post-COVID, I mean, I'm amazed at all of the startups that I've seen here. More money is going to go to that type of purchase funnel, digital purchase funnel investments, and less into brick and mortar. And then we as humans have gotten used to buying stuff online because we had no other choice for the past few months. So, I mean, if I were back to being a brand manager and you gave me $1 to drive top line revenue, I'm going to spend every single penny of that digitally, which has a huge implication for the real estate and brick and mortar world.
And for the e-commerce world. And you know, I agree with that 100%. I think that if I had $1, I'd be investing it from a distribution standpoint into e-commerce as well. But I think there's some caution in this as well. Bricks and mortar wasn't the most efficient way to distribute, and that's why we're shifting to e-commerce. But it did do a good job of a lot of very important things: differentiating your brand, allowing a customer to immerse in a brand experience, building a relationship between a brand representative and the person. And e-com hasn't necessarily figured all of that out. So if we just go full bore into selling things online, we run the risk down the road of hurting the viability of these brands. So I actually think that leads us to the next hypothesis that we have, and you can maybe switch to the next slide. And that is that there is something important underfoot when it comes to physical places. If we want them to survive, we need to be revolutionary in the way we attack the challenge. We cannot continue to iterate ourselves into better tools for selling things in store. What we really need to do is move away from the business challenge or the business proposition of valuing stores as successful based on sales per square foot, and shift them towards tools for interacting with people, right? To supporting humanity. We need to leverage and kind of take action on the human condition. We need to solve meaningful, higher level problems for people with these places, because the idea of solving the problem of buying a thing in the place has been solved elsewhere in a better way by e-commerce. But I actually think this provides a lot of opportunity for brands and for property owners. These needs are actually of higher value for human beings, solving important problems, emotional problems, allowing them to connect with each other, to culturally evolve, to have aha moments. This stuff has a huge amount of value for people, and brands and these places have the right to help solve those challenges for people. So if we can begin to think that way, and we can begin to build new business models around these new experiences that solve meaningful challenges for people, there's still a lot of viable opportunity for these places in the future, and a lot of opportunity to continue to have them help support growth of sales online.
So I think one thing that Bart said to me recently, which resonated, is being in COVID, you've realized you have enough stuff, and anything you really need, you can get online. As a result, we're a bit bored, restless, and seeking connections. And I see a lot of brands coming back with, I'm back to business. Here's a discount on my old stuff. And versus salons or things that are used to providing services that are like, hey, come back. We're going to help you reemerge. And I think that's where the humanity part in brick and mortar is going to be even more important post-COVID. So I guess with the last slide, and then we can go into discussion, is really why Bart and I have joined forces recently. You know, for 5 years, we've been trying to work on changing the thinking around retail. And if it wasn't already heartbreaking and emotional enough pre-COVID, we recently realized from some of our clients that if investment dollars dry up for brick and mortar, we're looking at a problem in our communities. Like, what's New York without Fifth Avenue traffic? And there's at least 4 retailers suing their landlords on Fifth Avenue right now saying, you're no longer a driver of traffic. Why am I paying you rent? Imagine your local town without Main Street shopping malls or Main Street shopping or shopping malls. And then I think, Bart, you had a stat about how many jobs in the US are retail?
Yeah, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 in 10 jobs in the United States relates to retail.
Brick and
mortar retail. So if you imagine kind of the demise of that industry, there's a huge social and economic implication. And that doesn't even include tax revenue from all of these places, which kind of ultimately has even greater impacts on kind of the future of culture and society and community. So there's a high level issue here that's incredibly important.
So what we're here to do is we've created kind of, I guess, a think tank, for lack of a better word, with our network to help keep destinations alive, relevant, part of the social fabric of the community, helping brands, developers, startups, municipalities tackle these challenges. But I also want to be clear that if this works while centered on brick and mortar, the byproduct is actually more e-commerce. Then we can get into that. But that's the intro.
Yeah, I think there's one more thing to add to that mission that's just kind of like a personal thing that I think you and I have been up against for the last number of years working together on projects. Is not only do we have this vision of the importance of these places for economies, culture, communities, etc., but there's also something very important in changing the conversation and changing the mindset of the people that are controlling these places, the people that are running brands and the people that are running malls, who are still beholden to an old ideology around why they exist, what they're supposed to do for people, and what they're supposed to do for the bottom line of the brand. And I think we also have a personal mission to try to change their mindset, because they're ultimately the people that define what happens here. And we need to try to help them understand that the old business model is important.
It's an important, super important conversation.
Yeah.
Because here we talk about how, we're looking at this from the perspective of e-commerce, and we're talking about how e-commerce is spiking, and everyone anticipates that that's not going to go back down, which I think is likely.
Yeah.
But when it comes to offline retail, most people assume that it's going to come back, but it's a zero-sum game. So it's either e-commerce is going to go back to where it was in February, or we have to rethink, what retail means.
Yeah,
So let's jump into some of the questions.
It's interesting that you use the term zero sum, because I think that's exactly the problem with why people have a hard time justifying spending money in brick and mortar.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we've also been forced into a reality in this kind of COVID era of trying it out. And there were so many holdouts that said, I still need to try the jeans on in the store. Or I don't trust that package is not going to get stolen. And everybody that said that has been forced to try it. And most of them have realized, hey, it's not all that bad. This works. This is pretty good. So I think you're going to just see this massive shift with very little return to the old way of doing things.
Yeah, because I can't really think of, are there categories, and I'm sure there are, where there are still like concerns around, buying online? I feel like even in, precious jewels and, cars. Yeah. Cars. Although I think, I've been, certainly reading about people who are, no one loves the experience of going to, I think someone talked about this yesterday. No one loves the experience of going to the auto dealership.
Yeah. It's the
worst. That's like that was like the mattress experience pre Casper and the other 20 companies who got into mattresses. So I think it's a really important conversation. And one of the things maybe we could start with from a question perspective is, we talk about e-commerce is going to accelerate. That's going to lead, presumably to lower rents and vacancies in retail. And I don't hear a lot of people talking about what opportunity that might create for new concepts and new ways to kind of envision what the retail experience should be. And would love to get your thoughts on what that could look like.
It's interesting. The lower rent thing is one that I don't think the landlords are yet there, and I'll give you a hypothesis for why. Mm-hmm. So if you go back to the 1990s where Bart and I were trolling the malls, profitability was based literally thinking inside the box, which is as Bart was saying, the metrics that you use to determine success for a store are very simple. It's sales per square foot, transactions in the store, times a steady same store growth rate. How many PE firms bought a 10 store retail thing and then just blew it out? So what people in the zero sum game, what people think about is, okay, if I open a store in Minneapolis, I want to be able to ascribe some sort of fixed value to that store. And if I close that store, I'll lose that X amount of dollars. That works when the only place to buy your product in Minneapolis is that store. It doesn't work in an e-commerce world. But today, the entire value chain from landlord to retailer to the brand selling it at a wholesale markup was based around transaction and same-store sales growth being the key metric for success. And so I think what's happening now, the transaction is, and that, oh, by the way, that's where all the contracts for leases are ascribed based on an implicit or explicit definition of sales within the four walls. So if you're a brand right now and you're trying to reach 80% of the American consumer, you're going to be able to do that on 3 platforms, Facebook, Amazon, and Google, versus having to find the tier 1 malls with all the traffic in the world. And then the mall developer is going to say to you, I guarantee you 40 million footfalls a year. Whereas Google is going to say, I can tell you how many people are coming here by minute. I can tell you their demographic, their behavior, and I'm going to help you hyper target them. So right now, to me, I'm like, the online traffic is more valuable than the physical traffic and where I put my money.
Yeah. And I think it's a really interesting thought. I think e-com is great because it's efficient from a selling and distribution standpoint, but it's hyper effective from a data gathering standpoint. So not only are you selling, you're getting a lot smarter about the people you're selling to every time you sell to them, and you're selling better and better and better each time. The physical world was wonderful for selling, right? Come in, if I can get you there, I can sell to you there. But it did almost nothing to capture information and data about people. It never figured out how to get better from the footfall. So I think if you look at the future of the bricks and mortar channel and where there's opportunity, it's less about selling and it's more about new values from footfall. So we essentially say there's a new currency that we're measuring profitability around, and that is intelligence around people. The new currency becomes the information I can convey to them while they're in the store and the information I can get from them while they're in the store. It's less about the thing I can sell to
It's monetizing traffic differently, and online has figured that out. It's the people who are running brick and mortar who haven't quite invested in that, and I think there's a huge opportunity for startups to help them actually monetize that.
Massive opportunity.
I was going to ask you, like, where are we with respect to technologies that can capture data, and then I see like attribution, if you can capture the data, presumably not particularly difficult, but capturing the data outside of, I don't know, like Wi-Fi, where, people capture information on you by providing you with free Wi-Fi, where you have to opt in, giving your email. What are, and from your perspectives, are there any like easy ways to capture data when people come into a store?
So there aren't, and I spent a lot of time in my past life on that, and that's because right now there isn't a great value proposition, right? So if I'm buying online, giving you my data, I get the value proposition that every time I come back to your site, ideally I have something that's tailored towards me. You're also going to ship it to my home, so I actually have to give you that data. How many times do you go into a store and by the time you're checking out, you've actually done all your search and discovery? That's when they, hey, Stu, can I have your email? And you're like, why? There's no reason for me to give you that. So I think there's ways to create a better value proposition for opting in, and there's beacon technology and there's all of this other stuff that can help you track and aggregate cell phones or people who are coming in. But I think there's no one doing it at any sort of meaningful way at scale that is useful enough for a consumer to be like, yeah, I'm going to give you my phone number.
I also think the barrier for the brand is a really challenging one, right? So if you think about a big brand and the investment it would take to build those technologies and implement them in a single store, it's pretty tough to justify an ROI on that unless you can scale it out. I actually think the real opportunity is in the mall operators and the mall developers. If these people can say, look, all of the traffic's coming in here, if you lease from me or partner with me as a brand, we're looking at all of this data together, right? And you have access to all of it. And I've built the physical or the digital infrastructure to help you capture it and utilize it. That I think becomes more viable than individual brands investing until the technology kind of catches up, or until we can be smarter about just using cell phone data and geolocating with.
Yeah. You can definitely use cell phone data and geolocate, in the aggregate, but like mapping it to a specific person, I think has like real kind of like PII issues.
It's a challenge.
But maybe the question is really like about going back to Julie's point. What kind of experience creates an exchange that people are willing to pay for with their data? So what can that look like? What kind of experiences do brands and retailers need to be thinking about that allow for us to capture that data and then attribute it and then value it?
I think it's a great question. I think, it goes back to this point of moving away from sales as the driver of action. We've spent 80 years designing stores and malls and whatever around product. We've spent billions of dollars creating places for product. We haven't spent very much money thinking about creating environments, places, or experiences for people. That has to become kind of the rethink in all of this. Is you start designing around people, their needs, their interests, their aspirations, and most importantly, their problems. I think brands need to start problem human beings. The problems that exist in your life today that I can help you solve. It's certainly not how to buy Pampers. That is not a problem anymore, right? You press a button, the Pampers show. That is not a problem I need to spend my time, energy, money, or facility in solving for you. What I do need to help figure out, or you figure out, is how to solve a higher order problem. Wow, I've got a child. I've got to figure out something important or interesting to do with them today that's fulfilling for them and makes me feel good. That's the problem I need solved. That is where we begin to develop opportunities for designing in the future. And like, for example, take that one, Crayola. Crayola is a store that sells tools, creative tools for kids, primarily crayons, etc. But their new retail proposition has very little to do with selling crayons. The lead is come here for creative play. Spend 2 hours here. Buy a membership in this place. They've built this creative play center, this arts center in the back area of the mall that is pay to play. So it's revenue generating. It's solving a meaningful problem for parents because they don't need to go to the mall to buy crayons, press a button for that. They need a place to go to play with their kids. So that type of experience is solving a real problem. And oh, by the way, it is an experience designed around a product they sell. And yes, you can buy them here if you want, or press a button and buy them online. What I've done is I've built your day with something meaningful that relates to the product I sell and the brand that I have, and it's built a relationship with you. And oh, by the way, you paid to come in, so I can pay my. I think those are the types of propositions that we're going to be.
Yeah, the other thing I think is building places around human expertise. So while we don't have a fancy algorithm in person to help figure out, to be predictive on what you might be interested in if you looked at this item, we have people to do that. And I can tell you 99.9 times out of 100, if I ask someone about a good retail experience, they say it's because they had an amazing person help them solve a problem. So for example, a very simple one is Warby Parker, right? Like you go in and get your eye exam there now, and then you buy the glasses. Or Benefit Brow Bar, where you go to get your brows done, and then you're like, oh, what was this tool that you used on me to groom them afterwards? The product is, Bart said this before, it's a supporting act to what actually happens in the space.
And so then if you were advising brands to create bricks and mortar experiences that make sense in this environment, what would you advise them to do?
I think it's pretty simple. I would advise them to design backwards. So part of the reason why Bart and I came together 5 years ago is if you are a company that's trying to think differently about retail, you don't have a lot of places to go. So most people tend to go first to a design or architecture agency. And if they're more forward thinking, they might go to a big digital agency. And I think the challenge with that is, as Bart was saying before, they end up spending all their time and resources designing the what instead of designing the why. And that's where you get these beautiful shopping areas that have $150 million art installation, or the Samsung experience that has this great immersive technology when you walk in. It's very front end, but you go once, you take a selfie, and you don't really go back. So when I say design backwards, I think you have to start with who's the visitor, who's the human, what's their reason for coming in here, that, by the way, is completely different from online. You're not building a competing experience with what you have on e-commerce. It has to augment it and actually drive there in the future. Who's that person? What human purpose can you provide for them? And the next question is, what humans do you have to bring into that store to provide that purpose? What type of expertise? And then this piece that everyone forgets, ask yourself, how do you monetize that? And how can you create some sort of attribution model on the back end to justify your investment in this? Only after you solve those two things do you bring in an architect or a designer or a digital agency to help you build an app that complements it. But everyone tends to start the other way.
Yep.
Right. Is it realistic to think that every brand that has a retail presence can also create a retail experience? It's hard to wrap my head around, like literally every store being able to come up with some experience that delivers value. But I guess if there's a challenge, people can rise to it. But what are your perspectives on that? This is where I
think the power of a multi-brand retailer still exists. I'm very sad at the demise of department stores, but I also feel like their debt loads were so high that they spent every dollar on trying to service those instead of improving the experience. But I think you had Camp here, and they're a great example of a multi-brand retailer where the brands that they sell products there can leverage their expertise on the front end of how do we create an amazing experience and collaborate with them to have some sort of affiliation of their brand or product with the experience at camp. I think Neighborhood Goods, who was
Right.
here yesterday, is also forward thinking on this. And hey, let me help you, small brand, handle the upfront experience side. We'll make it cool and better and more meaningful for the client. And we'll help you tell your brand story. I don't think every small brand has to create their own Crayola experience.
But I think that's really important to note is we are in an era of what I'll call corporate revolt, where the brands that are inspiring to millennials and Gen Z are more likely to be smaller startup brands with personal emotional stories and relevance and connectivity. And the big challenge that they have is telling that story in the real world because it costs money. So it's much easier for a big brand like Nike to tell a story in a space than it is for a small startup brand to do it. It's easier to do that online.
Yeah.
And
so maybe in the future you've got a few brands like Crayola and Nike and perhaps some of the emerging brands that have launched over the last 10 years that can create a kind of standalone experience that serves to create value through data capture. And then for most other people, they're going to be served by some kind of department store, let's call it, or specialty store, multi-brand store that is able to like create like a Neighborhood Goods or a camp, a kind of holistic wrapper for an experience that's consistent but serves different brands.
And
I think mall owners as well. So that's another big one.
Cool.
For mall owners.
I wish we had
attention there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And mall owners, I guess, have a long history of trying to capture people's interest through experience. Is like what's that mall in New Jersey?
American Dream.
Xanadu?
American Dream.
Yeah.
American Dream. Yeah. Maybe that's not the greatest example, but like, and you've definitely seen a lot of them now, like trying to. Maybe it's less about capturing experiences and capturing where people are going today, like gyms or where they were yesterday, going to studio. And now they're not going anywhere. Yeah. Anyhow, I wish we had more time because we are out of time. So if people want to reach you, I know you had a slide at the end of your presentation that had the website. So let me just share that very quickly. But do you want to tell people where they can?
So if you're interested in keeping up with our thinking, because our thinking evolves steadily, or if you have a specific inquiry or comment, you can reach out to us on futureperfectx.com. And we'd love to hear from you.
Awesome.
Thanks, everybody.
Great. Well, Julie and Bart, thank you very much for being here. It was a great conversation. Again, I wish we had more time. We'll do it next time. And
you
have
too.
A great afternoon.
Thanks for having us.